Hello pattern readers, this is going to be another Shadow and Bone video in which I dive into some of the biggest book-to-screen changes in the adaptation, talking about why they might have been made and what impact they had. Later, I'll draw some lessons from these changes and try to apply them to what we might expect to see from the upcoming Wheel of Time adaptation. If you missed it, I already covered the one really big change the production made by incorporating characters from Six of Crows into their own plot lines that intersect in small or big ways with the main plot line from Shadow and Bone. That video was spoiler-free, and this one will contain spoilers for season 1 of the show. So if you haven't finished watching yet, I recommend going and checking out that other video and coming back to this one when you've finished the season. A little bit more on what I will and will not spoil here. Because the first season pretty much covers the first book in the trilogy, Shadow and Bone, you should consider that this video will also spoil that book, but no worse than you would be by watching the series. So I will avoid spoiling any later books in the Grishaverse. Before I get into 10 of what I thought were the most interesting changes, I want to comment just a little bit more on the incorporation of the Crows characters. Because, of course, this is really the biggest change made in the production. And it necessitated a lot of other smaller changes to make that work. For instance, before the Crows even meet Alina, their plotline is used as part of the reveal that Alina is the Sun Summoner. Throughout the season, and especially at some of the biggest moments, these plotlines intersect, and that required lots of little alterations. So I'm not going to get into each of these because they all stem from that first decision, which I've already talked about at length. But now let's get into some of these other changes. Number 1. There are numerous changes made to the central character of Alina, and I think a lot of these changes ended up resulting in her having more agency as a character. I'll be honest, I enjoyed Alina as a character much more in the show than I did in the books. As I've talked about before, I think author Leigh Bardugo really grew a lot in her abilities with character development the deeper she got into this world. So let's give some examples of how I think Alina had more agency in the show. We see that as a child, she was the one protecting Mal from bullies. Later, these roles are going to be reversed, but this shows that she's a fighter. We also see that it was an intentional decision on her part to avoid the test for detecting Grisha ability, first by trying to run and then by cutting her own hand. In the book, she is subconsciously suppressing her abilities. And in this case, she still doesn't know that she is a Grisha, but it is an active decision on her part not to find out. She also takes an active role in going into the fold once she knows that Mal is going to be sent. In the book, she was always going to go as well. Here, her decision to destroy maps so that she would have the opportunity to volunteer is motivated by her desire to stay with Mal when he is in danger. Of course, there's the unintended consequence of her whole squad getting sent in, so maybe not a great decision, but it still shows that she is making her own decisions and willing to put herself in danger. When she is in the fold, her first summoning occurs not when Mal is in danger by the Volcra, but when she is. So that's another interesting change. One of the changes I liked the most was having Alina kiss Kirigan first. I have some issues with even the premise of their relationship, given his age and the huge power disparity between them, but having her initiate that physical relationship did help a little. When Baghra tells Alina what to do to protect herself from Kirigan, Alina decides not to follow that plan, but to make her own escape. We also see more of Alina's connection to the stag through her dreams and drawings, and she decides to go after it, rather than the idea coming from something Kirigan had told her to do. I think all of these changes mean that we can more clearly see that Alina is a self-directed person, so that even when she later on is put in a powerless position, and Kirigan has taken her power from her, she says to him, none of that had been her choice. And she's right, but we know then that that's not who she is in general. And when she has an opening, she begins making her own choices again. Number 2, changes to the character of Mal. I don't think I'm alone in saying that Mal wasn't my favorite character in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I didn't dislike him outside of a couple of moments, but in general, I just wasn't as invested in him as a character. I think part of the issue is that we only always see him from Alina's perspective, and especially when they are separated for a good chunk of book 1, we just don't even know what he's thinking for a while. So a lot of the changes really just come down to we get to see a lot more scenes from Mal's perspective. Even before he's separated from Alina, we get the scene of him fighting at the beginning. We get that scene with Zoya. And then when they are apart, we get to see his every effort to reach her and his decision to track the stag for her. We even get that flashback of the two of them in the brig, and we get to see Mal experience the loss of his friends. So for me, I think all of those additions solved nearly all of my issues with Mal as a character. And the rest was really resolved by significantly reducing the conflict of misunderstanding he has with Alina when they are reunited. More specifically, I was glad they gave him the line that Alina does not owe him an explanation about her relationship with Kirigan, rather than having him be jealous as he was in the book. I just don't really enjoy that jealousy trope. And in this case, it particularly seemed out of line when they had only been friends up until that point. Let's just say I was really surprised to find myself actually hyped by a couple of Mal moments in the last episode, when Kaz tells Jesper to give Mal a gun because if he isn't in Kirigan's crew, he's with theirs. And when Mal turns a line back on Kirigan saying he doesn't have to kill him, his past will do that for him. Number 3, Kirigan is given more depth as a character. We should start by talking about the fact that his name is General Kirigan, which in and of itself is a change from the book, where he is mostly referred to as the Darkling. In the show, instead, Darkling isn't really a title, it's used as a slur. But I think giving him a more typical human-sounding name is one small way to humanize him. Much more notable than the name change is some of his backstory, the history that we are shown from his perspective. So we get to see him at a point when he has no political power and when Grisha were hated. This is an element that the show plays up a lot more, and Kirigan is given, rightfully so, a lot of credit for protecting the Grisha from persecution and achieving much greater safety and status for them. I think it's possible to watch that history and his creation of the Fold and see it in a more sympathetic light. He wasn't trying to create the Fold. He did mess around with a risky magic, but his intention was to protect himself and Grisha from his oppressors who had killed the woman he loved and so many of his people whom he could not protect. Don't get me wrong. His later action to use the Fold as a weapon and expand it to destroy a town is a red line. There's no defending that. But I did feel that the show gave me more understanding of him as a character, and I just found him to be more three-dimensional than he was in the book. Number 4. While I'm talking about character changes, I will briefly mention some changes to a tertiary character, Zoya. Throughout most of the season, she's pretty much exactly as she is in the book, a pretty minor presence with a caustic tongue. Throughout a lot of the season, I found myself wishing they had done more with her character, knowing as I do that she does become a more significant presence after the first book. Most of the development that she gets is in that final episode, but there were a couple of changes prior to that. The first change was having her make an anti-Shu racist remark to Alina. I wish they hadn't done that. I can't get into this one too much more without spoilers, and it's possible that they'll be able to add some context to this later if they include something that we don't find out about Zoya until later on. But I still think it would have been better if they had just stuck to Zoya making nasty remarks to Alina that had nothing to do with her race. The second change is that we get this little scene of Zoya and Kirigan where she makes it clear that they used to mess up the sheets of his bed together and that she wasn't happy about that ending. So unless I'm mistaken, I don't think we find out that they do have a physically intimate relationship in the book. But we do later find out that she certainly wanted that. And I think it does help to have that information a little bit earlier. It gives us at least one reason why Zoya is jealous of Alina. More importantly, in that final episode, we do learn that she has family in West Ravka, and she was eager to see her aunt. And then as soon as Kirigan destroys that town, kills someone she loves, she turns against him and she tries to stop him. All of that is from the book, but we didn't get to see it at the time. We only learned about it after. So here we see that she is one of only 6 people to survive the Fold, not counting Kirigan. She's probably the most important witness to that event, so her support of Alina becomes really significant. And I think it was essential that she get that increased role there if she's going to be developed as more than a one-note antagonist. And so these changes in the final episode gave me hope that we can and will see more development for her character. Number 5. For the most part, I'm not focusing on changes to the Crow's characters because almost everything is newly created for them for the show. But I did want to talk about one significant change for Inej and Kaz. When we first meet Inej in Six of Crows, her indenture and her time at the Menagerie is already over, and Tante Helene no longer has any hold over her. I believe that when Kaz paid off her indenture, he paid it off all at once rather than in installments, but either way, it was already done with. Instead, in the show, we see that there is still a threat to Inej, that Helene could force her back into enslaved prostitution and the abuses she suffered at the Menagerie. We also have the change that Kaz stakes the Crow Club for Inej's freedom. It is implied that Kaz is perhaps the leader of the dregs and owns the Crow Club. In the book, he works under another man and only has shares in the club. This might just be a simplification, and maybe we'll get more explanation of that later. But either way, these changes do give us 2 things. We see increased stakes on the line for Inej, and we get to see a bit of a crack in Kaz's heartless persona by him risking something valuable for Inej. So it helps us understand those characters better. Number 6, there was increased use of flashbacks from Keremsin. I think this device was used to help fill in some of the gaps where we might have had Alina's internal thoughts, and the show needed to show us something instead. The show also used the device of Alina and Mal writing each other letters to a similar purpose. Number 7, I can't say too much without getting into spoilers for later books and possibly seasons, but I do think that there was a much better setup in the first season for the central romance. I didn't particularly like any of the romantic possibilities in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And even though we haven't seen it play out yet, I think that the show was able to address some of these issues, which stem from less robust character development and only seeing things from Alina's perspective. So I think the setup is there that this romance can work better in the show. Number 8. While I'm on the topic of romance, I will say that even though there was essentially no change to the Nina and Matthias portion of the story, what we saw of them was taken directly from the flashbacks we get from them in Six of Crows. It still made a difference to be seeing this part of their history first, to be introduced to them this way, rather than the way we are in the book. I think it helped me be more invested in them as a romance, to be seeing this development up front. Number 9, it's time to talk about a change that I don't think worked as well as it did in the book. Even though I liked most of the changes related to Alina, I did find that in the show, her struggles to learn how to summon were really toned down and certainly condensed by the nature of the adaptation. So that mostly took place in one episode. And I didn't feel there was as much payoff when she started to unlock her abilities. This was actually one of the few standout moments from that first book, Alina accepting and harnessing her own power. In the show, it was made to seem more normal. Everyone struggles, and Baghra has to heap abuses on all of them in order for them to be able to summon on their own. Even though I didn't love the idea in the book that Alina was subconsciously suppressing her own ability because she was holding on to Mal, I think we lost some of the payoff by not seeing Alina have a big moment where she finally understands why she hasn't been able to summon. Number 10, Milo the goat. Yes, the addition of a lovable goat who is also the goat. It might sound trivial, but I think even serious shows can benefit from the addition of humor and from moments that have the potential to be talked about outside of people who are already watching the show. Milo is certainly no Baby Yoda, but he played really well with the character of Jesper, who is already going to be carrying much of the humor of the show and bound to be a fan favorite. The internet appreciates moments like these, and any show can benefit from something that has the potential to be talked about and get attention. So let's transition to talking about the Wheel of Time and how some of these changes might be applied in that adaptation. So there are going to be some spoilers, mainly for the first book, The Eye of the World, maybe a little bit at the beginning of The Great Hunt. So use your judgment for watching the remainder of this video. I spent a lot of time in this video talking about changes that were made to characterization. And so for each of the examples I gave, I'm going to try to relate them to characters in the Wheel of Time who might benefit from similar types of characterization changes. In the case of Alina, I talked about the ways that she was given more agency in the show. Now, I don't happen to think that Wheel of Time characters in general suffer from a lack of agency. However, there is this concept of the pattern and ta'veren, which does to some extent limit the agency and the freedom to choose of all of the main characters to varying degrees. But bearing that in mind, there are some fans who think that Min doesn't have enough agency as a character. She has even been compared to a sexy lamp. Even though I have tried to dismantle that idea in this video, I do still think the show can make some changes that might help address this perception among some fans. The main issue, as I see it, is that when we meet Min, she has already had to accept that when she has a viewing, it is something that she cannot change. I think she does her best to make a circumstance work for her, but I think what would be a stronger narrative is if she hasn't already learned what can and cannot be changed. If we get to see her struggle to come to terms with her viewings and eventually affirm more directly that she is embracing where the pattern has led her, not choosing to fight against it. And if we also see her come to understand that the pattern can push or pull her in a particular direction, but it can't change who she is inside. It can't create feelings inside of her, so that those things are coming from her own self. For a character like Mal, who is an important character, but we need to see more from their perspective, you can choose almost any major character in the first book because Rand really dominates that one with his POVs. But I'm going to highlight Nynaeve, Lan, and Egwene for this one. Nynaeve we actually do get a few viewpoints from, but we miss a lot of what is happening in her thread, especially her love story with Lan. We definitely need to see more scenes of the two of them where no one else is a focus or even a witness. Show us what each of them starts to see in the other that makes them fall in love. For Egwene, I think the issue is that every scene we see of her in the first book is slanted through the perspective of either Rand or Perrin, and neither is a neutral party. So when, for example, Egwene starts to learn to channel, it is colored by Rand's dismay and fear of that moment. And when she gets some relief from her fear and enjoys spending some time with Aram among the Tinkers, it is colored by Perrin's judgment of that. And we don't get to see how much fear for Rand and the others has been weighing on her. Take Rand and Perrin out of those scenes, and I think we'll understand Egwene a lot better. For a character like Kirigan, who we need to have more backstory on to really understand, I have talked a little bit about how this might work similarly with Moiraine in my How to Adapt Moiraine video, so check that one out if you haven't. But I actually want to talk about Perrin a little bit here, which seems a little bit odd. What kind of backstory does Perrin have? He's just been a blacksmith apprentice in the Two Rivers. But in Perrin's case, I think we're told that he has a very specific fear that guides a lot of his behavior. And I don't think we're given a strong enough reason to understand why he feels that way. We're told that he is afraid that he will hurt someone simply because he's big, so he always thinks carefully and moves carefully. But Rand is just as big, maybe a little less muscled, but taller, and he doesn't have that specific fear. Perhaps related to this, once Perrin starts to become a wolf brother, we see that he holds himself back. He's afraid of losing control and becoming too wolf-like. This is, of course, probably partially explained by when White Cloaks kill Hopper and Perrin strikes them down almost without thought. But I think we need a little bit more context to understand why Perrin holds himself back in this way. And I think this can explain why some fans get frustrated with how long Perrin takes to accept certain aspects of himself, because they maybe never fully understood his hesitation in the first place. Because the show needs to show us something rather than tell us something, I think they could, for example, consider showing us a situation where Perrin does hurt someone without meaning to, and someone other than a White Cloak. I know it sounds strange to say, but the character I thought of is similar to Zoya, who needs a little bit more to help the audience like them better, is Matt. I know Matt is a fan favorite, but he isn't very popular for the first book or two. So I've talked about this before, but I think Matt could benefit from showing us some of the things that we see more of from him later on and bringing them in earlier, kind of like what they did with Zoya. So give us more of his humor and give us more moments where we see him willing to sacrifice himself for his friends. And I think that will go a long way to balancing out some of his less likable behavior early on. I think the use of flashbacks that we saw in Shadow and Bone provide a really good example of how flashbacks could be used in the Wheel of Time. They were sprinkled throughout the season and used in whatever order was needed to illustrate a point being made in the main timeline. Some scenes were repeated for emphasis, or we gradually saw a little bit more revealed each time. I think a very similar method could be used to great effect, hopefully, to gradually reveal what Moiraine and Swan have been up to. As for the better setup for romances, well, I've already talked extensively about how I think changes should be made to the romances in the Wheel of Time. So check out these two videos for much more on that if you haven't already. I don't think the first book has much focus on a character trying to learn a skill. That comes more in later books, probably starting in The Great Hunt. But I think there is a lesson here that they should be careful not to condense too much of the scenes of characters learning to channel in the White Tower. Of course, there's going to be some cuts to that, and no one wants to see endless scenes of training. But I think the idea for me is that there should be an ongoing focus on characters learning to channel, even when they're not officially in training, so that all of that skill doesn't seem to come too easily. Lastly, about Milo the goat. I think the point stands that it can be beneficial for a show to find ways to play up the humor. And I think this can actually be done in the Wheel of Time with existing characters and situations. But the other thing that I think this was a hook, an attempt to create something that would be talked about on social media and might reach beyond the people already watching. Milo might not have ended up being as huge in the case of Shadow and Bone as it could have been, but it's still an interesting technique worth considering. So how does a show capture a wider audience? Whatever gets people talking about it on social media. And in the case of Watt, I don't necessarily think it is going to be something funny or cute, but anything memeable always has potential. So I hope that the marketing team for the Wheel of Time will have a good sense of what is likely to get people talking and to have ways to play that up on social media. I have my eye on Loyal as a potential breakout star for the season, but there could be some surprises in store. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments on the first season of Shadow and Bone, whether you've read the books or not. Did it make you think of any potential changes we might see in the Wheel of Time, or look forward to seeing something similar brought to life? What are you hoping to see from a second season? And if you enjoyed the video, please like and share, and of course, subscribe for lots more content on fantasy adaptations. And until next time, gird your loins, my friends.